Hi, Read 516. This is Dr. Keisler, and welcome to week 2. We have a lot of stuff to go over this week. We're going to do a little bit of an overview of assessment, talk about formal assessment, diagnostic and formative assessments, and structured informal assessments. So lots of assessments, huh? But that's what this course is about. Um, it may have seemed like there was a lot of reading this week, and there definitely was. The reason for that is we used to do everything we did this week in weeks 2 and weeks 3. But what that would do is really condense the amount of time we had to work with students and to give you enough time to write diagnostic reports and all that good stuff. So like last 2 semesters ago, we decided to just go ahead and combine those 2 weeks. So even though it seemed like a lot of reading this week, it won't be like that every week. So don't be scared. It's also, you probably noticed, I know Dr. Biggs has made some changes to 511, so I'm not quite sure what he may be on right now. But in the past, I have taught both 511 and 516 in the same semester, and I realized how much overlap there was in the beginning when talking about things like reliability and validity and assessments and that kind of stuff. So here in Read 516, we really don't need to go over it in the depth that you'll learn it in 511. So it was, easy to kind of condense this, although it did make for a lot of reading. So what we're going to go over for this session is we're going to evaluate assessments against those IRA standards, which as of today actually is no longer called the International Reading Association, but rather called the International Literacy Association. So that's been a change that they've been planning on for some time. But what was kind of interesting is that I had one computer open and it had the IRA standards on it. And then I opened my other computer that I use for recording because it has a better microphone, and it had a different page. So I went to the same exact page and it has a different banner on top and it says International Literacy Association. So in the 5 minutes that I had different computers open and went to the same website, they changed their banner and they officially, formally changed their name. So I thought that was kind of neat. And then I went into my email and I had gotten an email about it that said, as of now, we are called ILA. So I'm sure going to keep calling it IRA all semester, but I will try to remember that it is now the International Literacy Associations. But the standards are the same. So we're also going to talk about the process of assessment, explain the characteristics of formal assessments, and then compare and contrast classroom-based assessments with structured informal assessments. So just a couple of things that we're going to cover during this week 2 session. All right, so last week, if you think back, we briefly investigated the disparities in definitions of assessment. So just kind of thought about the differences in those definitions and some of the key terms that we needed to be familiar with in terms of assessment. A few of those we'll go into a little bit deeper now. And then you were asked to consider the purpose of assessment as it related to your own teaching beliefs. So I thought I would start off with some quotes from your readings last week and this week. So in your Lipson and Wixon text, it says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. But those who teach without theories may follow the road that leads nowhere. In reality, all teachers have some sort of theory. So if you think about those of you who took 536, we spent all that time in the beginning talking about the theory and how important it is to understand the theories that underlie the practices that we use so that A, like this quote says, we know where we're going and we're making decisions purposefully. Or B, when we want to readjust or we want to consider something new, we understand how that practice based on a new, different, or competing theory fits in or doesn't fit in with our overall philosophy and theory behind teaching. So again, in this class, we're looking to develop a theory of assessment, and we have one here in the reading department, and that theory of assessment is the one that we are passing on to you over the course of this semester and through your other classes, but it's important that you also develop your own theory of assessment. So, knowing the purpose of assessments is key, not only for choosing the right assessments, but also for being able to use the data in a meaningful and purposeful way. So here's another quote that I wanted to share with you, and it's from the ILA standards, and that was that our assessment choices make very powerful controlling statements. So focus on that for a minute. Powerful controlling statements. So to whom, right? To us, to our colleagues, to our administrators, but also to our students. So let's just take a simple example like fluency. Let's say that you do several, timed fluency assessments each week, focusing on tracking accuracy and tracking students' word count per minute, right? Very common practice, something we all do, or many of us do, and many of us, may have students keep track of their own work. It's a good thing to have sometimes parent volunteers do in the classroom is take the kids out once or twice a week and do those time fluency passage, what have you. But a very common practice these days in classrooms. But have you thought about what message that sends to students about your priorities for reading, right? So your choice of using that fluency assessment, and I know sometimes it's not your choice, right? You're being asked to do it or told to do it, makes very powerful controlling statements about your values and priorities for reading instruction. So students who are taking those assessments and doing those timed fluency pieces and tracking their word count per minute may take the message away that your priorities and value for reading is dependent on reading fast, right? And that reading fast is the thing that trumps all else. Let's say you wanted to, measure and track fluency, but instead you did that by doing informal reading inventories, right? With an informal reading inventory, you do get a measure of fluency, but you're also getting measures of comprehension, right? So you're getting more than just that accuracy and that word count per minute, but you're getting some feedback about how the students are comprehending the tests, and you're also, because you're not just focused on timing them, getting good data about accuracy and the types of mistakes they made. So you, in that case, may be sending a very different message to students about your value for and priorities for reading instruction, right? So your assessment decisions have implications, not just for you and for your colleagues and for your administration and for the parents who read that assessment data, but for the students and their perceptions about reading and learning. So let's talk about those IRA or ILA standards a little bit. So I just wanted to pull out, I'm not going to go over each one of them in detail, but I wanted to pull out kind of a few little pieces of gold. So that very first one, the very first one states that the interests of the student are paramount in assessment. And I know you all read these, but I really wanted to underscore what they say about that piece. So they say, assessment experiences at all levels, whether formative or summative, have consequences for students. Assessments may alter their educational opportunities, increase or decrease their motivation to learn, elicit positive or negative feelings about themselves and others, and influence their understanding of what it means to be literate, educated, or successful. It is not enough for assessment to serve the well-being of students on average. We must aim for assessment to serve, not harm, each and every student. So that's a really powerful statement. And it's not by coincidence that the very first thing that we are going to have you assess students on are those affective characteristics. We're going to have you have you ask and have students think about how do they feel about reading and reading instruction? What are their interests related to reading, to academics, and then outside of schoolwork? It's really important to consider when collecting data that you can use to construct a whole picture of the student as a reader, that you consider some of those affective characteristics as well. And so, like I said, it's no coincidence that the IRA or the ILA, I'm going to keep saying it, puts this as their #1 standard. And it's no coincidence that that's the first thing that we have you work on as well. Keep in mind also that the teacher is the most important agent, right? Sometimes we don't feel like that because a lot of times we're told what kind of assessments to give, but at the end of the day, you are striving to be the expert in the room when it comes to getting a complete, an accurate picture of your students as readers, right? So most educational assessment takes place in the classroom as teachers and students interact with one another, right? So those big tests that we have give us some information, but most of that assessment happens day to day in those interactions between you and students. Keep in mind that the purpose of assessment is to improve teaching and learning, that good assessment should allow for critical inquiry into curriculum and instruction. It's definitely something that we focused on last semester in 536. A good assessment should reflect the complex nature of reading and writing. And so that's kind of in that example I just gave about fluency assessments. When we're thinking about fluency, what's the purpose of being fluent? Fluency doesn't just stand alone. And so our assessments that stand alone to measure fluency reflective of the complex nature of reading. We don't read to read fast, right? We read to understand. Assessment should be fair and equitable. Consequences of assessment procedures are considered for the group and for individual students. Multiple perspectives and sources of data should be used whenever possible. And that our assessment should be based in local school community. All stakeholders have a voice and families must be involved, right? So our students don't exist in a bubble. Our assessment data doesn't exist in a bubble, and everyone who has a stake in the success of our schools and the success of those students should be involved. All right, so excuse me. You may want to, as a little do now, make yourself a graphic organizer. So of course, I've provided you the PowerPoint slides if you want to take notes right on those slides, but it also might be helpful for you to make a little bit of a graphic organizer for yourself and to jot down some of the notes when we talk about formal assessments, formative and diagnostic assessments, and structured informal assessments, because some of them do have overlap, but there are also more distinctions between the three. So I'm actually, while you go ahead and do that, make that graphic organizer for your note taking, I'm going to stop this screencast here. Unfortunately, we have not solved the issue of the time limit on Screencast-O-Matic. They have apparently changed the levels of what it costs us to get different features on Screencast, and so it was over the threshold of spending that we can just make our own decision to get reimbursed, and so now we have to get approval. So while that takes another week or so, I am stuck using the 15-minute time limit version. So I'm going to stop you here, and we will pick up and talk about formal assessment.